Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hashtag History Podcast, episode 150. This is Rachel, and this week I am joined by one of my dear friends and heroes, Kelsie Brook Eckert. This is an interview you definitely want to hear if you want to learn more about women's history, what a difference knowing women's history makes, and what the current state of women's history is, given this political climate. So let's dive right in.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Leah.
And this is Hashtag History,
the podcast for both history nerds and history haters alike,
where we dive into history's greatest stories of controversy, conspiracy, and corruption.
So, Kelsie, I am so happy to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Can't wait!
I'm so excited to chat with you. So I wanted to give a brief introduction to you, Kelsie, before I give you the opportunity to properly introduce yourself, because I wanted our listeners to hear from me what a superwoman, superhuman I think that you are. Because I know that you won't toot your own horn. So for those that don't know, Kelsie Brook Eckert, she is the founder and executive director of the Remedial Herstory Project. She's also a college professor, an author, the state coordinator for National History Day, a multi times Ironman athlete. And I'm sure I'm missing many other titles, which include being a mom of two wild and crazy and beautiful kids. But first, I met Kelsie many moons ago when we were both relatively new to the podcast game. Leah and I had the opportunity to go on the Remedial Herstory podcast all the way back in 2021 to talk about Anita Hill. And I found myself pulled back to the Remedial Herstory Project and its mission over and over again. So I finally applied for the RHP board and was graciously accepted. And that's a board that I continue to serve on today. I'm so excited about all of the accomplishments and achievements that I have seen since being on the board. And I'm excited for the things to come. So now that our listeners know a bit more about us and our personal connection, Kelsie, I want to hand it over to you to introduce yourself before we dive into all things Remedial Herstory.
I mean, what else is there to say?
Yeah, mic drop and recording. But like I said, I know that you will not toot your own horn, so I wanted to get all the things out that I know you won't.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things. I am a professor, but I feel like that makes me sound snootier than I am.
So what is it exactly that you do then at the university?
So what I do is I train history teachers, and it's actually really aligned with the Remedial Herstory Project's mission, is to train a new generation of teachers and even current older. If you're an older teacher, you count too, but to train a new generation to, many of us in our teacher prep programs grew up thinking about Black history and labor history and all these marginalized histories that didn't get included. And I think that all still should exist. But within Black history, there are women. Within labor history, there are women. And so trying to challenge people to see that, those things that you learned in your teacher prep programs about inclusion and about the histories that we should know and include. Also, women are also in those things, right? And but it's not to say that we can't include white women. We should, right? But trying to train a new generation on that and using new. I shouldn't say newer because, using the inquiry model, which is a new movement, right, in social studies ed, and it's a great model for inclusion of all kind in social studies classrooms. And I say it's not really a new movement because that's what Socrates died for. So
right.
It's been a long time.
I think that was actually a perfect tee up to tell us more about RHP, not only what it is, but kind of how you started down that path. And I do have more specific questions that I'm going to ask going forward. So maybe here is more of just a snapshot of how you started RHP. What is RHP? What's the mission?
Yeah, so I was a high school history teacher. And so when I'm called a professor, sometimes I go, oh, well, I guess. But I was a high school history teacher and I wanted to teach about women and I thought I was doing that. And started reading a book one summer about, it was called America's Women by Gail Collins. She's an editor for the New York Times. And I was like 2 chapters in, and I went, I don't know any of the women
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
It was so embarrassing to me. And really that's the beginning was not a sense that I knew everything, but a sense that, oh my gosh, things have been hidden from
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And I started the project to learn. And so it started as a podcast, mostly to interview experts and talk to people and learn women's history and challenge myself to learn women's history. And I started writing my book, which came out this summer, this past summer, called Teaching Women's History, Breaking Barriers and Undoing Male Centrism in K-12 Social Studies. And that book was not, I'm not teaching women's history per se in the book, but mostly explaining why I didn't learn it and why other people who have teaching certificates didn't learn women's history.
Something that I remember, so I've read your book, of course, and something that I remember standing out to me walking away from that book, one of my biggest takeaways from it was the challenge of being able to name 10 women in history as quickly as you can name 10 men in history. And maybe similar to you, like you think you're doing well, because I was able to do that really quickly, like because of the type of work that I do. I can rattle off 10 women's names in the same amount of time, if not quicker, than I can name off 10 male historical figures. However, then the book had an additional challenge of like, okay, now name facts about those 10 women. And that's where I got stumped. I can tell you, I can speak about Abraham Lincoln for 6 hours. Can I talk about Ida B. Wells for that long? No, I can't. That's just the reality. And like you said, back to your book, it's not that we're not trying. There's a reason. There's a system in place. There's a reason why we can't talk about Ida B. Wells for 6 hours like we can talk about George Washington, for example. So even when we think we're doing really well, there are reasons for why we don't know what we should know.
Yeah.
And this takes me down another path. When I first asked you to be our season 15 finale guest, back when I did ask that, the country looked a bit more hopeful. I actually was looking back at the first email that I sent to you about coming on the podcast, and believe it or not, I sent it on November 4th of 2024. So little did we know, just a 2 short weeks later, things would feel a lot darker. And why I mention that is because when I first asked you to come on the podcast, I had hoped that we could talk about all the exciting and genuinely monumental things that RHP is doing and has done, and things that were on the horizon, all before it felt like we were constantly defending ourselves and fighting an uphill battle with zero funding. So what I'd like us to do here, Kelsie, is to pretend for the next 10 minutes or so that the election, which is something I do often, I try to be delusional and pretend that the election did not turn out the way that it did. And I want you to tell me, what was the future of RHP a handful of months ago? And of course, this is not to say that there isn't still a future. We're going to get there. But tell me a couple of months ago how things were looking, and most specifically, tell me about the gender parity resolution and what that was and what you accomplished and how you set about accomplishing it. And again, a few months back, what was the trajectory of your project?
One of the things that's really tricky about remedial herstory is that it's bound to the success of social studies education. And the tricky thing about the current moment is that women's history is not the biggest fish to fry right
Certainly.
now. Just history.
Mm.
Period. End sentence. Like to know it, to not have it be denied to us, to not have it be taken down, right? Like literally just like have information available to us and accurately portrayed, right? We have a
Right.
lot of like misremembering the past that's happening.
Yeah.
So in the fall, we were on, and I think we're doing just fine. And part of the reason we're doing just fine funding wise and other things is we've shifted away from bigger grants and towards individual donors. And so our financial position is pretty okay. But in the fall, one of the really exciting things, so I'm on the board for the New Hampshire Council for the Social Studies, and we send delegates to the National Council for the Social Studies, and every year they ask the state affiliates if they would like to put forward a resolution to be considered. And my board president brought it up, like, does anyone have a resolution that you'd like to have passed? And resolutions are always, a recent one was in defense of the teachers in Florida who are being told they can't talk about gay people and stuff like that. Like, those are often the resolutions. They're timely. They do have a political, sort of like, we're defending the social studies, we're defending the profession of teachers, right? And like, I don't think that there are teachers standing up in front of kids and making them gay, because that's not possible, right?
They're not injecting them with hormone therapy. That's what I heard. Especially out here in California, they just pass them out,
They just pass out gay pills?
Yeah,
Great.
they just pass them out.
Oh my Lord. So I was like, well, yeah, I have a resolution, because one of the things, one of our taglines for the Remedial Herstory Project is women are half of humanity. They should be half the content in history classes. And people, they immediately, when they hear that, the immediate reaction to that is, well, I don't know enough women, right?
Yeah.
So back to the, can you name 10 women and can you talk about them? That is the problem right there.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know enough women. That's a you problem. That's a society problem. That's not a history problem. Like, women in the past existed and they did awesome things. And so we've got to change the way that we remember them, or our process of preserving those memories. Like, there are women who were wildly famous in their time and like household names who are not remembered. So I was like, oh, I've got a resolution. So I wrote up a resolution for gender parity. And it's tricky because the New Hampshire, or the National Council for Social Studies, does not have control over state frameworks for the social studies. Those are controlled by the Department of Education and or the legislature in every state. But they do have, as a governing body for social studies teachers, a big mouth, right, that they can use if we get them to use it for good. And so my resolution was basically asking that they put pressure on states to amend their state frameworks to be gender inclusive, and to meet gender parity by 2030, and to offer professional development at because that's what they do. Their conference is a huge PD opportunity, and to get the primary goal of those sessions should be to educate teachers on what they didn't learn in school and provide them with that PD. So we were successful in passing it, and it was kind of a dramatic scene. I was told I wasn't allowed in, and I actually was allowed in, but they, and I was waiting in the exhibit hall where we had a booth for the Remedial Herstory Project, and I had all my interns with me and our director of research, Jackie, and the president of the New Hampshire Council for Social Studies and the treasurer from the New Hampshire Council for Social Studies come running in the room. They're all in a tizzy. And Brett Vance, who was our vice president, was like, it passed! I was like so excited. And he had given, it was really cool too that it wasn't the Remedial Herstory Project, which I think could be seen as like a perceived, even though it's not accurate, as like an interest group or something like that. And instead it's a state affiliate, and it's a man nonetheless, like championing this resolution on the floor. And he started, his opening line was, "This isn't about women's history, this is about human history." Wow. And really grounding it in the larger point, right? That women are half of us. Yeah. And if you're not telling half of humanity's story, then you're not telling human history.
Right. How were you feeling leading up to it? What percentage of your core said this thing's going to pass?
Oh, well, the resolution. So I drafted the resolution in the summer, and then it's a waiting game. And the conference was actually the week after the election. So I was, sort of how you started this whole thing. I was in the like, this is the end of women. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Because we just elected a sex offender and a rapist to be our president. And And we have a woman who has served in all three branches of government.
One of the only candidates to have ever done so.
And I was listening to white liberal men who sort of plugged their nose and voted for her. And when they broke my heart maybe more than conservatives did, because the conservative vote was predictable.
Yeah.
Their comments about her, like, I really had a hard time because there was so much like her voice is whiny, and it was
Yep.
hard to hear
Her
because I was like, oh,
laugh.
her laugh,
Mhm.
she giggles too much, she, whatever. And I was like, oh, I laugh too much. I am whiny. Right, and I don't mean I am whiny, like my voice higher pitch and whatever. And I was like, every critique I heard of her from these liberal men was hard, because it was like, that's me, right? Like that's also me, and that's also me. And but did you read her policy? But do you
Yeah.
know economic plan? Do you know that 16 Nobel Prize winning economists thought it would be a good idea, right? Like
Yeah.
like that. To me, it was like I wasn't listening to data and information anymore. And when you come in and say women should be half the content in history classes, I'm not saying that because I am like self-interested, or like I'm not going to be in the history class. I'm not asking kids to teach about me, like
Mhm.
like it's data based, it's evidence based, it's study after study after study that shows that women have been erased from history, and we're
Mhm.
watching women being erased from history. And it's not that they didn't do stuff, but we get these myths from people that they didn't do things. And so I don't know, I was in the blues, the post-election blues, going, there's no way it's going to pass, because the men who I thought would have voted enthusiastically for Harris's policies, not
Right.
Harris. Like, I don't give a shit about Harris. Like, I care about her policies. And that was the part that killed me, was even the people who should agree with her policies were not
I,
reading.
I hate to break it to you, Kelsey, but you're being far too logical and rational here.
Oh,
And I need you to shut off the logical part of your brain. And we are basing people only on their laughs. That's how we're judging them. You did make me think of, and of course you know the book because you assigned it for your course, Women in Power by Mary Beard, and there is a whole section about how being an orator, how being a vocal member of society is a male delegated role. And a lot of
yeah.
that has to do with the octave and the pitch of your voice, and that women's voices, because they are higher pitched than male voices, historically have not been given value or agency. So it goes to what you're saying. It's evidence based, it's data based. This has been going on since the days of the Greeks and the Romans, right? And another thing that you made me think of just now that I think is really, really important, and I have quoted you a couple of times over the last few months in this regard, is so often I think women's history and women's historians are hit with the negativity of women weren't there. They were in the kitchen and they were child rearing, so they were not part of World War II whatsoever. And that's why we don't know about them or we don't hear about them, is because their only contributions to society were how high they were able to raise their sourdough. But what you have said that I think is really great is how validating this current moment is for women's historians, is that we are actively watching women be erased from history. We are actively watching women be removed from the defense's website, from NASA's website. And so while it is disheartening, it's validating. We can point to current day examples of why we don't know about more women during World War II, and why all we know about women in World War II is that they raised kids.
Yeah. Or came out to join the workforce for the first time.
Right.
That one kills me. It never worked prior to 1940. Like,
Right. The other thing that I remember you mentioning in your book too is how we can never say of men in history that all of the men were in the home child rearing. No, you could never say that about any group of men at any point in history.
yeah, like more appropriately, like all men were fighting in the military.
There
Like,
you
no, they
go.
weren't. No, they weren't. I think that's one where, like, when you know that objectively, like during
Hmm.
World War to many men were fighting in the military, both of my grandparents,
Hmm.
like yes, but there were other men who were in the government. There were other men who were running factories, like Henry
Right.
Ford. There were other men who were, right, like men were doing a lot of things for the war effort. And like that, but for women, like
Right.
women were Marines, women were in the army, women flew planes, they sorted mail, the new Netflix show, they did so many things. They
Yeah.
were moms. They ran businesses because the men were in the military,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like that, but every period of
Yeah.
history.
It's the generalization of women that you could and would never say that all men were doing one singular thing at any point in history. You wouldn't, you can't. And so
Right.
why do we do that for women?
Yeah. I mean, I'm bummed that I think you're right. It has been oddly very validating, although depressing, to
Hmm.
watch women being pulled off of government websites and their books banned and
Hmm.
pulled from, military schools and that sort of thing. But I mean, we're watching it in real time.
Yeah.
We're watching it in real time. And I think this is why. If women accomplish something and men did not, what does that say about men?
Mm.
And that, by the way, I personally think it says nothing. Right? I think it says great thing about the women, but machoism, fascism rely on a very particular definition of men.
Mm.
And that definition is domineering. It involves hierarchies, and women can't be above men in that hierarchy. And so they have to be removed, taken down, returned to their place. Um, and I actually was just speaking with one of my colleagues here in New Hampshire who works at the Cohen Center, which is a Holocaust and Genocide Studies Center, research center in New Hampshire. And one of the things he was sharing with me, and this is a new opportunity for the Remedial Herstory Project, we're going to collaborate with them on some curriculum because every single genocide has been preceded by misogyny. Like
Mm.
it is a necessary step toward the authoritarianism and the extremism that leads to that sort of extreme outcome.
Mm.
And and I think it is because that hierarchy, that returning women to their place is a threat to not men, but authoritarians.
Yeah.
And that I think is the part that's lost on men, right? It has nothing to do with you, dude. It's about the dude who's trying to control you. And if he can convince you that you're better than the women, then he's got you.
And that right there is an example of why studying women's history is so important. It's not so that we can talk about Ida B. Wells for 6 hours. Well, yes, that would be a wonderful thing if we could too. It's how we shape society and we actually predict the future based on
Yeah.
how much we know about women and how we value them in our society.
Yeah. There's a great lesson we have on our website where you evaluate an empire in history based on the status of women in that empire. And
Mm.
one of the things that should not be shocking, but I feel like it is that the empires where and civilizations where women were well are also the ones that were strong empires, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like that it's there, it's one and the same. And it's some of it is just silly. Like when women are economically empowered, you double your workforce.
Right.
That's just not
Simple
like
logic.
what are you doing? Like it's not like, do you care about the economy? Me too. Guess what? Women should be allowed to work.
Right. So that actually takes me to two questions that I have for you. One, I wanted you to talk about all of the accomplishments that RHP has achieved. I want you to talk about lesson plans and books and podcasts and videos and all those things. But before that, maybe speak to the resources that are currently available on the website to teachers right here, right now. When you mention lesson plans, what are you talking about?
So we built, I started when the origin story of me being like, I don't know anything, I began by building an inquiry-based lesson plan a week in the academic year of 2020 to 2021. So I was building an inquiry all the time. An example was there's a great lesson from the Digital Inquiry Group, which is based out of California. It was at Stanford and now it's sort of everywhere. But they built this lesson plan about the Chinese Exclusion Act, and I was like, "This is a great lesson plan. I love it." And I taught about it for years. And then I had this silly awakening that women are half of humanity. And one of the things reading the primary material with my students in class, like literally, it was an epiphany that happened in class. The documents kept talking about all these single Chinese men coming over, all these single Chinese men coming over. And I went, well, where are Chinese women? Like, why are they coming over? Right? Like, that's weird. And so, but I don't know that I would have had that epiphany if I hadn't been reading the book and started to go, oh, there are gaps. And I think when you start asking the question, where are the women? You start to see that question everywhere.
Right.
Like, where are the women in the White House? Where are the women in this meeting? Where are the women in my office? Where are the women, wherever? So I Googled and I learned about the Page Act. And I want you to understand how absurd this is. For anybody who like studies California history, this act probably is more known than to those of us on the East Coast. But like,
not by a lot.
but like that's how absurd the absences of women's history are. And so the Page Act was this act that actually predated the Chinese Exclusion Act that basically accused Chinese women of being prostitutes. And it's not that there weren't Chinese prostitutes. There were in San Francisco, but they, even married women weren't coming over because they were being like strip searched at the border, and they had to provide documentation and proof that they actually were married to the men that were bringing them over and all these things. And so sitting in the back of the room that week, I built the lesson plan on the Page Act because I was like, this is so cool. I've never learned about that. And now I can't imagine teaching the Chinese Exclusion Act without it, right? It's like, this is why we only had single men and why white men saw them as a threat to the gender balance in the West and all these things. So then in the fall of 2022, we won our first major grant from the Library of Congress, and we built 55 more inquiry-based lessons with funding from the Library of Congress. Because we had that funding, we were able to have them reviewed by scholars. And so, the sort of missing piece there was I built this thing on the Page Act, but I'm not a scholar of Chinese history or immigration history or California history. And so how great is it to be able to hire people to actually review those things as historians and make sure it's accurate, it's telling the right story. We've included the primary sources that are like the primary sources that you should include. So we did that. And then we got the grant again the next year. And so we've built over 160 inquiry-based lesson plans. And so inquiry-based is they're all driven by a question, and some of them might be little sassy questions. But we genuinely are posing those questions because we think they're debatable. So we have one on Chinese history about Confucius, and the question is, was he sexist? And I think it's actually a really good question to ask because even though obviously you could pull some quotes of things that are attributed to him, there's some debate among scholars about whether or not he actually said those things or if attributed to him and yada yada. And I think that's interesting, and we want kids to get into the like nerdy scholarship about that, not just the provocative question of like, well, So I really, we have these awesome inquiries available to teachers, and for practicing teachers, they'll know what I mean when I say the inquiry model. We copied the model from the Digital Inquiry Group, so it's not C3, which I think is a bit more cumbersome, and those words mean nothing to non-teachers.
Yeah.
But, for the teachers listening, that's what we did.
What else has RHP accomplished? So we have the gender parity resolution. We have 160 plus lesson plans that are free and available to educators right now on the RHP website. What else?
We wrote multiple textbooks. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, and honestly, this is what's driving a lot of traffic to our website because there are, you could Google a topic related to women in history and just stumble upon us. But we have 29 chapters on US history and on world history, spanning, the survey of those courses. They're really designed to follow a typical US history course or a world history course. The European history text is being written right now as we speak, so that's very exciting. That's actually the first one where I wasn't the project director on it. So Chloe Gardner, who lives in Scotland, is leading the European history
Mm-hmm.
initiative. And all of those were written by the process for writing those was really long. We had teams of people who wrote the chapters initially, but then we did internal peer reviews where we like, for example, Professor Nelson wrote World War II chapter because she's a military historian.
Mm-hmm.
I am a more of like a social historian, and so I came through and was like, and I added all these other things to
Right.
it. And so we get this really, we have a very collaborative process of writing these chapters. And then we sent it out to scholars so each chapter was sent to people who are, experts in really narrow stuff for their dissertation. And we also had ninth grade English teachers review it to make sure that it was at a ninth grade reading level, which,
Mm-hmm. Which is the goal.
yeah, which is the goal. And so the European text is in the like write the initial chapters phase, and it'll, it's going to be a bit before that comes out. And then actually last year we wrote two other textbooks. These ones are much shorter, but one on government and one on economics. So
Mm-hmm.
those have four chapters and they cover sort of the big themes of those courses. So for government, it's the nature and purpose of government, the structure of government, the function of government, and then foreign relations, right? Those are the four kind of themes. And then in economics, it's personal finance, it's micro, it's macro, and it's international trade, right? Like looking at those four things. And those I wrote, and we had peer reviewed by scholars here at Plymouth State University in political science and anthropology. For the nature and purpose one, we pulled on an anthropologist to review it because it's really about like early civilizations
Mm-hmm.
and rise of the kind of enduring question of that one is patriarchy the natural state of government? And looking at models of governments and societies where that wasn't true, and
Mm-hmm.
why do we see a predominance of patriarchy even if it's maybe not natural? So it's an interesting enduring question. So we have these textbooks. Right now, we are in the process of publishing the world history textbook through Routledge.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we picked the world history textbook to do that is because there is no competitor for it.
Mm-hmm.
There are other
Which
U.S.
should be shocking information.
I know. I know but there are US textbooks. There's Through Women's Eyes is a competitor of ours. And for us, it's more is more. Like I
Yeah,
don't act
definitely.
as a competitor because I think it's a great book.
Mm-hmm. There's space for all of us.
There's space for everybody. But the world history one, it's pretty alarming. There is no survey of women in world history. And I say that with some caveats. There are several written where it's like compilations of scholarly essays that combined tell us survey, but they are not written at a like average reader grade level.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple that are more like themes in for women in world history. So, Who Cooked the Last Supper is a
Yeah,
good
yeah, yeah.
example, by Rosalind Miles, and I think it's an interesting book. The uh, the bias in the book is a little overwhelming when you read it, and as a history professor, I would like to see it a bit more neutral and more like evidence to defend. And she has lots of evidence for some of the claims that she makes, but I think more would be helpful, especially if the goal is a K-12 setting.
And I know that's a big goal of all the textbooks is to come across with a neutral tone that is readable at the elementary to middle school to high school level. And I think it's just such a huge accomplishment. I've had my eyes obviously in the textbooks a lot, and I'm really amazed by how much content is in there and how far that project has come. So I know that that is certainly one of the big future goals for RHP is to get these books published. What are some other big future goals that you have for the Remedial Herstory Project?
I mean, a million. Right now we're in growth mode and just get the word out, outreach.
Hmm.
We have a vision of a video series that accompanies everything. So teachers that maybe don't want to assign the chapters to read in class could play a quick 10-minute clip
Hmm.
in, when they're talking about World War II, and here's your clip on women in World War II that you should know. So that is an ongoing goal that we're fundraising for.
And that does already exist in podcast format. You've already done that. Each chapter has been recorded and published as its own podcast episode as well.
Yeah. Yep. So you can listen to those, and then the goal of the video would just be to add a little bit more like multimedia,
Hmm.
visual, and other supports for learners. Um, but my vision, and it's slowly playing out, is that it is no longer a radical idea that women are half of humanity. It's just, and it's interesting. I interviewed one of the high school teachers who is using our resources in her classes, and she was telling me that the first time she used a Remedial Herstory Project lesson plan, she goes, "Okay, guys, we're going to have a moment and we're going to do some women's history."
Yeah.
And what she got kind of predictably was some enthusiasm from the women, like, woohoo, finally, and some grumbling from other people, like, okay. And I think it's sort of the like, the slur like of DEI. All right, here we
Right.
go. We talk about women for this minute. And it was so disheartening for her because she was like, this is a cool thing that we're about to do. And it's super relevant to the learning objective of this unit. What's the problem?
Yeah.
And so the next time she taught with one of our lessons, she just taught with it. Like
Hmm.
no intro, no explainer.
It's history.
It's just history. And so I don't know what time period she was teaching about, but whatever, during this time period, women were doing blah, 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 blah. And here's the
Hmm.
inquiry that we're going to do. Let's go. And she said it went great. And the
Of
kids just
course.
did it. And it wasn't a thing. And that's what we want, is it not to be a thing. And in a weird way, I do agree with those critiques of DEI. Like, we're not learning about Black people because it's some special woo-hoo-hoo thing.
Right.
We're
It's
learning
not
about them.
pop-up history.
Yeah, because it's history, and you
Hmm.
should you should know what happened to Black
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
right? And like how they affected history.
Hmm.
So it's that's really exciting. So we have launched just this year an ambassador program that you're heading, which is so and we have, I think, over 20 ambassadors now.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Hmm.
Um, so that is I think a huge opportunity for us to meet more teachers. We've had people present, and I get to see on my side is an ambassador does a presentation in Minnesota. Like Emily presented at the Minnesota Council for Social Studies conference.
Yes, our friend Emily over at the Whining About Herstory podcast. She is our Minnesota ambassador, and she is kicking butt over there. So definitely check out the Whining About Herstory podcast. Everyone here already knows about them.
Yeah, she's a force. And so she presented, and then on my side, I get to see the downloads. And so I
Oh,
see lesson plan download, lesson plan download, lesson plan down. I get all these emails, and
that's
I
cool.
promise I'm more organized. I have a folder where they go so that I don't have to clog up my inbox. But it was really, really cool to see the effect of that, and to know that, like, one download means that that teacher could teach that to 25 kids in a
Hmm.
class, maybe 80 on their caseload, right?
Hmm.
And then they might do that this year and next year
Right.
and year, right? And so we've just hit hundreds of kids with one download.
Hmm. And that I hadn't intended necessarily to do a little shameless plug for the ambassador program, but since so many of our listeners are all across the country and are educators, this is a good opportunity to share about the RHP ambassador program. And essentially what it is just getting those lesson plans to teachers at the state level. And so if there's anyone out there that is interested in being an ambassador for the RHP program, you can check out the RHP website. There's a whole list of what states already have ambassadors representing. But there are certainly gaps, and we would love to hear from more interested people.
One of the reasons it's important to me that it's state level people
Mm-hmm.
is that women's history is all around your backyard and you just
Mm-hmm.
don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
And in New Hampshire here, I like to point out that the tallest building in Concord, New Hampshire, our capital, is the Christian Science Church, which is a church building that was built in honor of the church's founder, Mary Baker Eddy, a New Hampshire woman who was born here, and she was the first New Hampshire woman inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Into the Women's Hall of Fame at Seneca, New York. I bring this story up with New Hampshire people, right? People born here, living here, 30 years, whatever, and they go, who? And that kills me, like she's one of the most famous women in the world in like 1895, and no one in New Hampshire today knows who she is. And still her history is everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Her birthplace is marked. There are two houses just up the road from where I am right now that she lived in that have historical markers out front of it. And like, it's over. And there's so many little things like the New Hampshire Historical Society, their sort of primary historian has written 2 books on figures from New Hampshire. Franklin Pierce, who was a president.
14th president.
Yeah. And Mary Baker Eddy, those are the 2 people he picked to showcase from New Hampshire history. He could have picked John Stark, who said the live free or die thing. He could have picked, anybody, but he picked her. And it breaks my heart a little bit that even New Hampshire people don't know it. And the history being in your backyard is, to me, really illuminating when local people don't know that. And so if we have state and those are the examples for New Hampshire. But the examples in Tennessee could be super, super different. And a presentation that calls people out on not knowing really obvious things for their local communities. And I don't know. Don't quiz me on Tennessee history. I got nothing.
But when it's real life examples that you can step outside your front door and see, it sticks with you better than learning about a woman from California. Who cares? If you're in Minnesota, you're like, cool, some lady in California did this and this. I think not only bringing it down to the state level where there are sites and people of interest that are in your state, it's not only that, but I think that, say a California woman goes and speaks to a group of educators in Minnesota, rightfully so, they might not care what I have to say. And so that is another purpose of the ambassador program, is to be a trusted voice amongst your community. You are a trusted voice because you are in the community and you understand the challenges and the environment that you're teaching in. That's part of why the ambassador program is so important.
Yeah. And it's been really, really heartwarming to see all the people from kind of various backgrounds. I mean, Emily's unique because she's her claim to this role is she's a podcaster on women's history. But we've got English teacher, like Micah Wolf is our ambassador in Oklahoma, and he's an English teacher. We have PhD candidates in Nebraska. We've got history social studies teachers. I think that's the ideal candidate because it's the people who teach K-12 history, but it doesn't have to be that. And it's been really heartwarming to see all these different people rallying to take those posts, and they're going to do the work on the ground. And the traffic on our website is awesome, but I also know that one download is thousands of kids.
For sure.
So it doesn't need to be a ton of downloads for us to get the impact.
For sure. So now what I would like to do is to return to reality. I think that there are lots of wonderful, positive things, and I am really encouraged to hear that funding for RHP is sustained by personal private donors, and I hope we do kind of dive into that a bit more. But I do think it's also really important to talk about the reality for RHP given the current administration, to talk about the setbacks that the organization has experienced, and what setbacks you as a professional and an educator have experienced as a result of the last couple months.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to segregate some of the hats that I wear.
Yeah.
But I'll talk about the Remedial Herstory Project really quickly, which is really that, I mean, the first thing that hit us was the word restriction.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was banning certain words from being allowed in federal grants. And so we have for years been applying to the National Endowment for the Humanities, abbreviated to the NEH. We've also applied to federal grants from the Library of Congress. And those grants are hard to get. Like they're really competitive grants. I think they have like a 14% funding success rate. So I spent way too many days reworking the language in our narrative to take out words that honestly make me cry that I have to take them out. Like to say, I wasn't allowed to use the word woman one time. And so we're a nonprofit advocating for women, but we can't use that word.
Mm-hmm.
And I cry a little bit about it because for us, like I think about the impact. The impact on us is we might not get funding for projects to re-educate teachers. I cry a little bit when it's like a nonprofit might not get funding to do sexual assault prevention because they need to use the word woman at some point there. Or and not that men don't get assaulted, but like predominance.
The word men is not on the list of banned words.
Yeah, but men are allowed to get funding specific to their needs, but women are not. You're not allowed, what if you were researching menstruation, or what if you were researching menstruation, but you can't use the word woman.
Right. Right.
In
Or
anywhere.
female is also on there.
Female was banned. Diversity was banned. And that's a word that I use a lot because it's very important to me that Remedial Herstory Project resources are not white women's history. I'm confident someone could know more about Indigenous history and critique what we've included in there, but that's not our goal, and we would take that feedback and we would change it, so that to me is really important. And so I wanted to be able to say that we want to tell a diverse women's history, and can't use the word diversity, couldn't use the word inclusion. I actually I was citing my own book at points in the proposal, and the title of my book, Teaching Women's History, so far 1 out of 3 words.
Teaching blank history.
Teaching blank history. Breaking barriers. The word
isn't barriers one of the words?
Barriers was banned. So breaking barriers and undoing male. I could say male, but I couldn't say centrism in K-12 social studies. So of the title of my own book, I had to ban like 4 of the 5 of the words banned, right? So it was it just got stupid at some point. And so I did a control find in document, and I replaced the word woman throughout the document with non-males. And I just replaced words. I replaced diversity with like range. I said like a range of human experiences or something. And mostly because I know that there are good people at the NEH, that if I could get through whatever AI bot was scanning the camp, then we might get it on the other side. But I needed to get it through the initial scan looking for the word woman and whatever. And then other people could read between the lines of the dumbest document I've ever written in my entire life about non-male history. So that was phase 1, but then phase 2 was that they shuttered NEH grant funding ability entirely. So I did all of that work, and from from an economic standpoint, what Trump is doing right now is an absolute waste of people's time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if I had known that we were just going to shut off their ability to fulfill grants, then I wouldn't have hours and hours and
Hours.
hours and hours, like
Mm-hmm.
hours, where I could have been grading student papers or
Absolutely.
like having with people who need support or literally doing anything. I'm doing, you want me to be more commercial? Like I publish other books. Like I could have published another book by now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some of the time I've wasted on these things. So um that just means that, we have not landed one of those federal grants yet. They're big and they're competitive and whatever, but every year that we are a nonprofit and every year that we win more grants, we improve the position and the possibility that we basically prove to these big funders that we have capacity to administer a grant of that
Mm-hmm.
size. And so every year I'm more hopeful that if we apply, we might get it. And obviously that it's a it's a non-impact on RHP because we've never gotten it before. So it doesn't hurt in that way. It was just a colossal waste of my time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the NEH grant funding is impacting me with another hat that I wear because, I mean, anything related to history, they get their funding from the NEH, right? So the National History Day program is at the national level, gets most of their funding from the NEH. And
Mm-hmm.
then here in New Hampshire, and this is true in every state, we apply to our state humanities council to get funding to fund our own program. So I don't apply to NEH, I apply to the New Hampshire Council for Social Studies and I get funding. I've gotten $10,000 from them, which is the maximum. It's the largest grant they give out every year for the last 3 years. And this year, they told me that they could only give me $5,000. So I lost $5,000. And I want to make this very clear. Every single penny of that money goes to New Hampshire kids.
Mm.
So I have been sliced in half in what I'm able to support kids
Mm-hmm.
with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's terrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
The New Hampshire Council for the Humanities gets their money from, wait for it, the NEH. So what's happening at the federal level is going to destroy grant funding. It's going to require them to lay off people because they can't pay them
Mm-hmm.
anything. And that's not just in New Hampshire, that's literally every state humanities council. So people are going to lose their jobs. Organizations that do really good work in every state, whether or not that money actually comes from the NEH or not, it's coming through their humanities council to them. It's going to cut off revenue streams for a lot of really good organizations. And in the case of National History Day, what is horrifying about this is it's not that, I want to make this really clear. They are not saying we're going to close the NEH and it will, starting now. What they're doing is, and they're not closing, they're cutting off revenue streams. They're ending their ability to grant make. But what they have done is they've actually cut off grants that were already promised people. So for National History Day, we are in the middle of the competition cycle. Like New Hampshire has already had our state competition. We are sending kids to nationals. We are booking flights. We are booking hotel rooms. Like the train is moving. And the federal government told National History Day that all of their grant funding that they were expecting to have is not in place. And so in June, they need to host a competition that thousands of kids from across the country are flying to, and they don't have any money to host that competition that is already underway because it got illegally, this is the key word, illegally taken from them by the executive branch. These are congressionally allocated funds.
Mm-hmm.
Trump should have zero ability to cut off that revenue stream because Congress said that the NEH was in charge of administering this money, and the NEH did that. and Trump is stopping them. So National History Day is actively fundraising to close a $136,000 gap in funding that they need by June. I mean, it's also student grant making. They give out like scholarship prizes to
Which is
kids.
a huge incentive to participate in something like this.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's
Mhm.
horrible because it's I mean, of all the things, it's literally taking money from children. Like,
Yeah. Well, and that's some of the effects that even we're seeing here in California. I have a girlfriend that is a librarian who has expressed a lot of worry about their computer system is federally funded, and with the Museum and Library Institute being closed, they
hmm,
are expecting any day now. This is in California,
mhm.
30 minutes from my house. They're expecting to lose their computer system literally any day now. And it goes kind of to what you're saying again, it's children. Who's using these computers? It's kids, it's adults that need those services, but it's kids. They're going to the library. The federal funding for libraries goes to things like story time, where I take my kids on the weekends. The quote that I keep saying is cruelty is the point. It's
Right.
cruel, and that's the intent.
Yeah. The thing that gets me about History Day is without grants, we run it like a for-profit,
Mm,
right? Like for me, looking at my budget, I have two choices. I can jack fees for kids and schools,
mm,
or I can win grant funding and keep those prices low. And
mm,
here's the thing that gets me with this admin is you want a meritocracy. That's what we want. Like, okay, so if the fee to register at states is $200, I'm making up a number here,
mhm.
is $200. Well, now it's not a meritocracy. It's which kids have $200 in their back
Exactly.
pocket.
It's a class system.
It's a class system. And so here's where it perpetuates the meritocracy though, because the kids who then win at the state competition that I'm hosting, they get to put it on their resumes.
Right.
And then they get into better colleges. Or the middle school, it's a middle school competition too. So those middle schoolers get into fancy high schools,
Hmm.
and then those high schoolers get into fancy colleges. And then
Hmm.
we have basically said that the kids that get to go do who are the best students in the country, in quotes, are rich kids.
Hmm. Because they're the only ones that could find a seat at the
The only
table,
ones who could afford to
afford a
participate in
seat.
a competition like this.
Hmm.
That's not a meritocracy. A meritocracy is it's free, and if you have the grit and the tenacity to dig deep in archives and do your research, you win, right?
Right.
You get the awards, you get to put that on your resume, you get to go to college. So that on the History Day front, like that is very alarming to me. Because like the question is it possible to run this competition without federal funds? Of course it is. But that is
That's
the
not the point.
antithesis of the goal of this sort of thing. We need public funding for these things. And then
Hmm.
I'm in a really tricky situation in New Hampshire because if, many schools pay the state fees for their kids to participate in the program, but we are 50th out of 50 states in terms of statewide funding for public schools.
Mm.
So our state contributes next to nothing per child for their education in public schools. Yet, if you look at data, you'll see that New Hampshire schools are really, really strong. And so
Yeah.
how do we do that? We do that because individual towns have really high property taxes, and they
Mm.
use those property taxes to pay for really high quality schools. But if you look really closely at those data points, you will notice that one town 20 minutes away from another town has huge differences in student learning outcomes.
Mm.
And the difference there is which town has a deeper tax base.
Hmm.
And the inequity in New Hampshire schools, like from one town to the next, is very, very alarming.
Mm.
And so I'm in a really particularly tricky position because if we raise the fees, yes, some schools will be able to cover them, but then it's sort of the same thing again. It's the wealthy schools with the bigger tax bases who are on lakes. We are in the lakes or in the mountains or, whatever. And so we have people with second homes that live in those places and, that sort of thing. And so it's not a meritocracy anymore. And they are reducing, town budgets. Our legislature's trying to tax schools, like public schools. And I bring all these little patterns up because it's all connected, right? I mean, the Remedial Herstory Project is tied to the social studies. And the social studies are tied to education broadly. And education broadly is tied to federal and state monies going toward research in education and what best supports kids and, that sort of thing. And like, they're attacking everything that I just said,
Yep.
In addition to the teachers who work in these places, right? Calling them all sorts of names. J.D. Vance said that professors, people like me, are the enemy. That was a direct quote. Professors are the enemy. And I want to be really clear, like, it's not just about funding and defunding programs and stealing money from children. Like, the extremes of the rhetoric that we're hearing from the government right now are very dangerous. Like, when you say professors are the enemy, like, so what are you going to drag me out of my office and shoot me? Like, that's what you do with enemies, right? And I want to be really clear, like, this rhetoric, this is what Stalin said.
Yes.
This is what Hitler said.
Yes.
This is what Mao said. And people need to do their research because, like, in the Cultural Revolution in China, they dragged professors out in front of mobs and beat them to death for their research. Because of things that they were researching and writing papers about. Like,
because education is a threat.
Because education's a threat, and because independent educational institutions like Harvard are a threat.
Yes. And that's what I wanted to go back to, is the inequality that exists when federal funding is cut to things like National History Day. It's intentional. The intent of the Department of Education, the efforts to dismantle it, are intentional. The Department of Education was not created to control curricula. Its purpose is not to control teacher salaries. That is already at the state level. That's the argument that I keep hearing, right? Is that we need to bring our curricula back to the states. It already exists there. They are already the ones that create those guidelines and your teacher salaries and whatnot. The Department of Education was founded because they found that schools were not treating students equally, that students from lower means and lower incomes were not receiving the same education as those of higher means. And so it is intentional. Dismantling the Department of Education dismantles our ability to provide equal education and opportunity to everyone. And the people that have lower education tend to vote in a predictable trend. That's the point.
That's the point. It's yeah, I mean, the people who benefit the most from federal money toward education are not you and me in our coastal states, right?
Right. No,
It's the lowest performing states where the tax bases can't afford the education necessary to keep up with Massachusetts. Let's be honest, Massachusetts is #1 in the country for education almost every year across a number of different measures. And if you want to keep up with Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, by the way, is outperforming other schools, other international, other countries. And so when we generalize and aggregate US education data, the really problematic piece of that is you're putting Mississippi with Massachusetts. And Mississippi is one of the biggest benefactors of federal money coming from the Department of Education, because the federal government is trying to create more equity and help Mississippi out, right? Because they're aren't able to have the schools that Massachusetts is able to have. And that's the problem. But when we say American schools are failing, I have two thoughts about that I think your audience should hear. One, it is exactly that attitude that actually makes us the best, because we constantly think we're failing and we're constantly looking to improve. And if you go into any school anywhere, ask any teacher anywhere, I promise you they will tell you that they have done PD on this and PD on that, and they're trying to fix this problem, and now it's mental health, and the next thing it's AI, and how do we work with that, and what do we do with this? And they're overwhelmed with the number of efforts in a good way, like well, sometimes they complain about it, but the number of efforts to keep the schools improving. And I think that is unparalleled in other industries, right? The feedback loop and the oversight, right? Not in voucher programs, not in these charter schools, but the oversight. I mean, I'm in schools all the time and I don't work in them, right? My job is to supervise and provide oversight in public schools, right? Like we have strangers going through the schools. We have the state coming through schools. The principal and the vice principal are coming in to supervise teachers. And they're constantly trying to improve. And then the second reason we need to be really careful about what we say about our schools when we say they're failing is they're not failing. Some of them are failing. Mississippi's failing. Yeah, badly, right? Some towns like in New Hampshire, right, where our aggregate data as a state is great. Yeah, but not when you get into the town by town level because of the way that our tax bases are structured. And you were saying that, the federal government doesn't handle curriculum. In New Hampshire, our state doesn't even handle curriculum because we are the live free or die state. And so every school district gets
Controls their own.
determines their own curriculum.
Wow.
You can go to our DOE website and you can see like recommended frameworks for English.
I would even say that disproves their point even further, that all the way down to the most minute micro local level, it's already being controlled by you. It's not even for your state. It's not even at the state level. That's the rhetoric. That's the argument.
But again, it's not, I mean, you said it earlier, you called me out earlier. It's not about data. It's not about accuracy, right? Like
It's not about logic. Unless we apply logic that says the point is to have uneducated people, then the through line makes sense. Like, oh, I see now.
right. Or to say, one of the things I've heard our commissioner of education, who is a voucher enthusiast, and he's like Betsy DeVos, but New Hampshire. He's leaving. He's leaving. I literally texted everyone, ding dong, the witch is but one of the things he has said is that, the law says that children have to have an adequate education. They do not have to have an elite education or the best education or whatever. And I think the definition of adequate is like, can they read? Can they do their numbers and call it good? But like those two things does not a 21st century job holder make, like we need a lot more than that. And then I think the problems in our society, this is the social studies hat, like they are not fixed until we actually teach children honestly about the society that they're entering. Honestly means honestly, right? I think sometimes it's like, there's too much of this or too little of that, and it's the right amount of both of all those things, right? Like more Black history, but it's not every Black person ever was a slave and their life was horrible, right? Like, so finding the balance there where you're actually teaching the accurate tone of the history in your classroom.
So let me ask you then, what advice you have? What advice do you have? What advice do you have for how we navigate this administration in these times? And that's asking both with your educator hat on, how do educators respond to this administration, but also how do you as a woman, an active member of society, as a mom, how do you navigate these times?
Multiple things are true at the same time. So one is that we have to keep our head. And if that means don't look at your phone because you can't keep your head, then don't look at your phone. Right. And like you determine that your healthy relationship with the news, because a healthy you is the most important you that we get. But we also need you, right? Like part of why we need you to keep your head and keep yourself healthy is because we need everyone standing up in this fight against fascism. And I'll use the F word there. Because it's wanting to control narratives, erase people whose narratives are different, right? You can read the Remedial Herstory Project's textbook. There are lots of conservative women highlighted throughout that document. There are lots of women who didn't want suffrage, right? Like not hiding that those women existed. It's not a feminist textbook. So we have to keep our heads because we are all needed. And I think the thing I'm coming to right now is there is no like bell where we go, that's fascist. Everyone
Right.
now we rebel, right? Like that's not
Mm-hmm.
how it works, right?
Nope.
Like Hitler was fascist from go, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was fighting in the streets with the Nazis, he with the party before, well, when they were small and they were fringe and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. The other thing I think is lost on a lot of Americans is the press ate up Hitler. They were brutal
Yes.
to him. They were like, this guy's an
They called him a loser.
idiot. And it's not enough because
Yeah.
you have to keep people from voting for Hitler, right? We have to keep,
And the reminder is that he gained power through democratic means.
yeah. Right now, we're not, what we are doing is we are stopping the further attacks. We need
Mm,
lawyers suing. We need parents not complying. We need parents at school board meetings demanding accurate history being taught in their curriculum. We need
mm,
people at budget meetings at the local level, at the state level, screaming at elected officials to be, and I mean that maybe more figuratively than literally,
sure.
but like
Passionately.
passionately talking to elected officials to say, you know, this budget does not align with our values. This budget does
Hmm.
not align with our values. And like if that budget passes, this is the best part of conservatism is that they want more money in your pocket and less money being funneled through the government. And so if you get a tax break, which I don't think you will, but if you do, put that money to the causes that you care about. Do not,
Mm,
because that what that should tell you is that some needed organization just lost money, right?
yeah.
Because it's now in your pocket. And so you need to put it toward assault prevention or a food bank or, you know, whatever. Like these are the groups that most need those funds right now. Give it to literally like give it to your public school so that they can send kids to National History Day, right? Like give it to your local community. Don't give it to National History Day if you don't trust a big group. Like give it to the kid who won in your town, because somebody did, I promise, or maybe in the town next door. So I think we cannot give an inch because if you give an inch, you're creating a slippery slope. And right
Yep.
now, this administration is testing that. Can
Hmm.
we take Venezuelans who are not legal residents here and put them on a plane and send them to a prison, right?
Yeah.
Can we take a resident who
Who is legal?
is legal, but oopsies, and send him to a prison. And if we can do that, then could we send people we don't like? Then
Hmm.
could we find Professor Eckert in her office because we don't like her rhetoric and she is the
Hmm.
enemy, right? And can we send her? And I'm not honestly worried about me at all. I am worried about people who are way more high profile than me.
Hmm. No, I fully understand the through line though, because the scariness of what is happening right now is he received no due process. If he didn't, why would you?
Right.
You say, I am a US citizen, I haven't committed any crimes, but you aren't given the process to show that documentation.
One of my favorite films that I hope people watch is Bridge of Spies. It's a Cold War era.
Oh yeah. I is that Tom Hanks?
Tom Hanks. It's
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen that.
Hanks is in a lot of movies, but this one is honestly my favorite of his movie.
Okay. I
And
need to rewatch.
the reason it's my favorite is because in the very beginning of the movie, he's a lawyer and he's tasked, this is a true story. John Donvan is tasked with defending a Soviet spy in court. And he's been caught. He is a spy. We know he's a spy. And he's an American lawyer who has to defend a Soviet spy in court. And it goes all the way up to
Hmm.
the Supreme Court. And he is so good at his job at negotiating that they end up using him to negotiate the release of Gary Powers, who was an American pilot shot down in the Soviet Union. And he was not supposed to be there, and he was spying, taking pictures with his plane. So they exchanged Donvan's guy for Gary Powers on this bridge in East Germany. And it's a great story. But there's this line very early in the movie where he's talking to another lawyer. And he said, the lawyer says, like, what are the rules? We're making up the rules right here. Like, this is how the rules happen. And Donvan is like, what I love about this character he's playing is he's a very principled person. And he's like, no, like, I'm Irish. I forget what the guy's descent was, but he was like, I'm Irish. The only thing that actually makes us American is the Constitution. Like, that is it. That's what makes us American. And I think about that in my own family history, right? Like, my family is, I don't know, German, English, French, like all sorts of things. And we came over around World War I while our nation was at war with those places, you know? And what makes my family American is that we accept the rule book and we follow the rule book. And it's like the most exceptional rule. I mean, this is me being American exceptionalist for a second, but it's an exceptional rule book. It has flaws, perhaps, but it is the longest lasting rule book in world history, in democratic history. So there is something really powerful about that. And the only thing, honestly, that I'm learning that's holding it together is our desire that it's held together, right?
Yeah.
People complying, people, I mean, I think about George Washington, like one of the reasons he is such a significant figure in history is because he could have been a king and he chose not to be. Right. Like, and he said, no, like the principles of the Enlightenment, of this era, of this movement that we started is that 2 terms is enough.
Establish the precedent for that.
Yeah. I think that we don't appreciate enough as a country how fragile this is.
Definitely.
And it means that us as individuals need to respect the rules. We need to watch our own rhetoric, right? When we're frustrated with other people, like don't other them, right? Like they, you know,
that's good advice.
There are not like I'm frustrated as hell with a lot of Americans right now, but I am also empathetic to the circumstances that they've grown up in and why Trump rhetoric would be persuasive right now. And I'm frustrated that they've been duped. And I think it's frustrating that they were so easily duped. I'm frustrated with conservatives who know what I'm talking about with this Constitution and aren't being more vocal right now. Republicans in the Senate who are surrendering their rights as senators to the administration
who have sworn an oath otherwise.
Yeah, like that is mind-boggling to me. And it's hard. I think what's really tricky is, and this is the part where liberals need to check themselves, but why it's hard for conservatives right now is they want what he's doing. Of course, they're surrendering those things because this is like the best victory lap they've ever had. And the consequence, I think we need to be careful because I think a lot of us do that. We say, okay, well, I want this thing, so the ends justify the means, right? And no, trampling our Constitution is not the means, right? Like if this is the goal, if defunding these federal agencies is the goal, then do it through Congress. And you can't, so okay, like that's your problem. And that should have been the Democratic wall.
Right. And that goes to his 9-0 Supreme Court decision that we've semi-alluded to already is how the checks and balances work in our Constitution is this isn't what I want, but this is what the judicial branch has said is the case. And I'm speaking from his perspective, the executive perspective. I have an agenda. However, the courts don't agree with that agenda. And because of the rule of law, okay, we got to side with the courts. I did want to, before I let you go, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to talk a little bit more about your book and the accompanying course that you teach.
Yes, I would love to. The book is one that I now assign to my students. I'm a mean professor who wrote a book and I make my kids read it. No,
I love it.
With my particular students in mind, right? Like they're the target audience of the book. That's the area I'm in. But it is for pre-service and practicing educators to rethink their craft and consider what they maybe missed out on in their own education programs. And if you are a practitioner of inquiry, there'll be some parts of it that are repetitive there. But what I did was I created an online course that you could take, and read the book, reflect on the writing, and it's a lot of like you reflecting on it, thinking about ways that it applies or connects to your classroom or curricula, and joining other educators sort of in that experience. And there were some, it was really interesting. I didn't like teaching the course because I really wanted people to reflect honestly about the book. And
Mm.
I was worried that people knowing that I was going to be reading the commentary would affect that. So I think we're going to change it to have a different person administering the course.
Mm.
Um, because I really genuinely would like people to be thinking about it. Because
Yeah.
I think there are some ideas in there that are pretty radical, and I would like people to radical in like this is a big change. This would require big change.
Hmm.
It was interesting reading the commentary because the first couple chapters are just about how big the problem is and make
Hmm.
people really aware of how much history they don't have a clue about. And reading the comments from the educators taking the course, they were like, I'm overwhelmed. There's no
Yeah.
way by the end of this book I'm gonna feel confident to like fix
Hmm.
this. And I don't know. It was funny because reading their comments, I was like, oh no, I didn't really give a lot of help in fixing this problem. But then but what I think the book does, and where most of the people ended with their final reflections, was they started to get nuggets, they started to get ideas,
Hmm.
they started to explore the Remedial Herstory Project's website a little bit to show just to see how much work we'd done already to help them do the thing. And ultimately, one of the last chapters is just be brave, just do it. It's
Yeah.
like Nike, let's go. And
Yep.
a lot of people reflected on that. Like, I think I just
Hmm.
need to do it and stop overthinking it.
Well, and a lot of what being an educator is, and you said this in the book several times, is you don't actually have to know all the answers. The best educators are the ones that say, "Thank you for that feedback. Let me get an answer for you," or we'll discuss this in class tomorrow when I have had some time to do some research on my end. And so I think that that is a lot of the fear, right? When you're trying to start a revolution, that was me putting that in little air quotes, start a revolution by, I don't know, talking about half of history, is not knowing all the answers and the fear of being called out on not knowing all the answers. And I think we as a society need to get better about acknowledging the acceptance and actually the bravery and courage that it takes to say, I don't know the answer to that, and I want to provide you with the correct, accurate answer. Let's circle back on this tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and I think for people listening, there are definitely people who are like, well, you're the teacher, you should know the thing. And I like if that's been the thought you had listening to Rachel talk right now, let me tell you this. I have studied just D-Day for an entire
Mm,
year. And there's no way I know everything that ever happened on just
right,
D-Day.
right.
So, that was part of a fellowship that I won to go. I went to the
Mm,
beaches, I walked them, I saw the things. I've been to a million museums, like I've done all the things, and I still wouldn't stand in front of anyone and say, "Yeah, ask me whatever. I know the answer." I know a lot of
yep.
things about D-Day for sure,
Hmm.
but people who pretend to know everything are lying to you. Might even be president.
All right. Well, Kelsey, I really can't thank you enough for joining me today. I cannot believe that it has taken this long. This is our episode 150 and is the first time that you are coming on the podcast. Is that insane?
Yeah, but holy moly, 150. That's amazing. Congrats to
It is
you.
amazing. Thank you. All of the ups and downs of life. And here we are on the 150 side of things.
Not necessarily stronger or wiser, but just resilient as heck.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, I don't know that I'm stronger, but I'm definitely a lot more resilient and passionate than I was when we began. Can you share really quickly with our listeners where they can find you, your book, find out more about RHP, the podcast, the lesson plans, all the things?
Sure. So the Remedial Herstory Project, the best way to interact with us is through our website, which is remedialherstory.com. You can actually find all sorts of information about me there, the bio that Rachel mentioned at the beginning. My book is published through Routledge. Actually, I have two. I have another one about National History Day that you could read if you're interested in starting that program in your schools. It's not specific to New Hampshire at all. And both of those can also be found on Amazon. My History Day book's only on Amazon. And I think those are all the main ways to find me and interact with me. I also have a podcast, so you can search my name. And my podcast is part of the Remedial Herstory Project's work. And similar to Rachel's, we interview people on women's history, but we also talk about pedagogy and other things there. So if you're liking this, you should jump over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelsie.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Hashtag History. And a special thank you to my husband, Alex, for editing the podcast. Subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you use, share about us with your family and friends, and then give us a rate and review. Also, be sure to check us out on Instagram at #history_podcast. And come join us over on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you can help support our books and booze supply. This is really a place where you can just support the podcast, and in exchange for your support, you will receive an automatic 15% off all merchandise, and we mail you cards and stickers. Finally, be sure that you are following us on Instagram so that you can stay in the know about our return for the next season of the podcast. You're definitely going to want to stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for being here. Bye.